Today's topic is an open world shooter set in the post-apocalypse that was released on the 15th of February 2019. It starts with a train derailing and features long boat rides, a mutant with bear thing as boss fight, and quirky characters. So basically it is Far Cry New Dawn, except that it takes place in Russia instead of Montana, meaning everything is more depressing. So I was ready to just re-upload last week's review with a more drab color palette and replacing the whiskey jokes with vodka ones, but no such luck. With disappointment still lingering in my brain, as well as the game's controversy around it dropping from Steam without notice and now being an Epic Store exclusive, I polished my torture rack to drag this game across. But after having finished it, and despite its flaws, I just can't get myself to hate it. For starters, the game looks pretty good. While there are games with better technology out there, the game makes up for this with nice visual design, great landscapes, and outstanding cinematography in its constant in-game cutscenes. This is aided by an exceptional audio design where the growls and footsteps of monsters you hear while walking down narrow corridors with no way to escape left or right makes you hold your breath with anticipation of which limb is about to be bitten off first. It's a shame that the voice actors can't hold up with the standard set by the rest of the audio, as the extremely prevalent Russian accents are varying greatly in believability. No, I'm not saying they are bad voice actors, but about half an hour into the game, I couldn't help myself but Google their names and was not at all surprised when almost all their names were American.
Whoever kills the Munai Bailair is my friend. The Munai Bailair, as we call them, turned my people into slaves. Wanted to put me in shackles too. Better death.
The world and maps are beautiful and brimming with details. The visuals in many moments are nothing short of stunning, and they're quite varied from church lake settlement through the desert to government bunkers. Unfortunately, not all of the stations are particularly believable. The Ark, for example, is a government shelter taken over by cannibals, but for one, all the bodies you find are fully intact, making these cannibals really bad at cannibalizing, but also they've been living in there for 20 years, and according to the logs, 19 of these, they've been surviving by eating each other, which poses the questions how there are still hundreds of them left. Now, being German, I don't mind a good sausage fest, but I find it striking that there are barely any females in this world, and all settlements are exclusively inhabited by men. And while with 3 or so exceptions, every man is a hostile, crazed killer with either rapey or cannibalistic tendencies, we not only immediately team up with every woman we meet, they actually all fall in love with us on first sight. Throughout the game, you find one imprisoned woman with a daughter on the first map, which later marries Stefan. One woman in peril on the second map that falls in love with Damir, and as a female scout on the third map who immediately falls in love with Alusha. Other than these 3 and your own wife, there are only like 4 or 5 women, all sex slaves in a single building, which incidentally I'm pretty sure we murder as we do blow up that building. And before someone says this has to do with the survival of the strongest or warrior-based culture, let me remind you that even the Vikings had shield maidens. Talking about surviving, while gunplay feels impactful in both the enemies and you die after a few hits, the action sequences are the least frequent gameplay in this, as the game switches between action, stealth, open world, and story sequences. The main gameplay hereby is looking, as the game's constant cutscenes are like 80% of the total runtime. They are well scripted and well written, though they can be quite lengthy, and while this isn't a problem the first time around, it greatly reduces the game's replayability. With multiple endings and hidden collectibles, the game desperately wants you to go a second time like a girl after you left unsatisfied, like always you fucking loser. But after a particularly bad crash with blue screen, my save game got corrupted and I had to replay close to 1 hour of the last mission, and I was mind-bogglingly bored, as this entire time was basically just me listening to dialogue I already knew. This talkiness of everyone around you is made even worse by all NPCs being insanely slow and stopping randomly while walking. Even in high-octane moments, everyone takes their sweet time, and waiting for the NPCs will drive you insane. Especially when one of the timers, like your gas mask filters, are running low. Oh, you're suffocating. Well, that puts me in mind of a tale.
So, the war really did put people back into the Stone Age. Cave paintings and all. They toughed it out here for some time. I wish we'd gotten here earlier.
The story of Metro Exodus is about the now grown-up Artyom getting bored of eating frozen mushroom and he wants to explore the world. Everyone but him, however, seems convinced that only the people in the Moscow metro survived the nuclear war because Moscow had the best air defenses, ignoring both the fact that a country's capital might be the major target of any missile strikes, but also that other cities have underground railway systems as well. But after seeing a train, a conspiracy is revealed, where some of the inhabitants are isolating the metro from the outside world on purpose, and after some back and forth, Artyom, his girlfriend, her father, and a bunch of their friends have to flee the city via stolen train. Now this is as effective as a story opening can be, even though your father-in-law and all your mates showing up at the exact time you're leaving the city might be the biggest deus ex machina in story history. Your friends all have a decent amount of personality to the point that I'd like to have a real beer with them and cared enough about them not to get them actively killed. Though I honestly didn't care too much when the first of my teammates was shot, since it happened so early I honestly couldn't even tell them apart yet. Your love interest Anna, however, is so well written that even though the game starts off with a love story already fully established and she didn't bring me flowers or anything, I did find myself caring enough for her at the end that when she got sick I actually understood why the main character would want to go on this insane journey in order to save her. Unfortunately, like a relationship with an attractive person, the game does have the same problems as others as soon as you're inside. The only new mechanic to its predecessor, the open world, absolutely doesn't fit the game. For one, because the game shines most in its highly scripted sequences, but also, in any of its open worlds, you only have like 3 or so missions at a time with an obvious pattern of which to do next, and all the open world adds to this experience is additional walking time, with the possibility of wasting ammo on randomly spawning mutants. The side quests also fail to make you feel like they matter in the slightest, as they aren't something relatable like get some food or save your friend, but rather get that teddy bear or get me this guitar over there at this particular location, even though we constantly see guitars everywhere. It doesn't help that even though the story always makes you feel like you're under enormous time pressure, you can't just lay down for a little nappy at any time, which literally sucks out all feelings of urgency like a masseuse does during the happy ending. But the open world not only messes with the pacing, but also with the highly scripted action sequences. So for example, at one time during an action sequence, you're supposed to enter a building where you get ambushed by monsters, and you shooting at the monsters causes the bad guys to surround the building, causing you to be in a shootout to leave the building. But because it's an open world, my first instinct upon seeing the monsters inside the building was to leg it outside to fight the enemies as they come through the door. This worked absolutely perfectly, but then upon re-entering the house, which was now empty, the sequence triggered, and I heard them shout outside about all the shooting inside the house. I left the house a second after entering just to see the enemies had teleported into position. Also, even though the game does feature vehicles, and I clearly heard them come in by truck, there was no vehicle to be found anywhere because it was just the sound played in the background. The game has 2 different endings, and while I know most people will disagree with me on this, I don't think that games like this should have multiple endings. When I finish my game after 15 or so hours, I want my cookie as a reward and not undo it all over again and this time do it right, kind of thing. But even if we agree that multiple endings made sense, this particular game shouldn't have a good or a bad ending, but a neutral one. I got the bad ending first, and since it was a bad ending, it left me down and unsatisfied, like I hadn't accomplished anything over these 15 hours. But after watching the good ending, I was astonished how out of place this felt. The game has a very depressing, harsh, downtrodden atmosphere, and it just doesn't lend itself to this level of happiness. It's like Dark Souls ending at Candy Mountain. With that said, the ending scene where the boy talks about Miller's death is without doubt one of the best written moments in video game history and sincerely tugged at my core at 10 in it. All in all, I did enjoy the game, both in gameplay and in story, and while the open world was underwhelming and there weren't enough boobies in the game for my taste, I probably had more fun in the metro than anyone who ever took the actual Moscow underground.